Hey guys, this is Jay Calden with JAYONBOXING here giving you a fight preview for Errol Spence versus Terence Crawford. And before we get into my initial thoughts here and all that good stuff, let me know what you guys think down in the comments section below. Would love to hear all that, of course. Greatly appreciate when you guys drop those comments. Trying to be as active as I can down there. So, of course, drop all that, your picks, your bets, all that good stuff. Love to hear it all. And, of course, be sure to like and subscribe. It greatly helps out the channel. I know it's growing slowly but surely, so I do definitely appreciate that when you guys go ahead and do that for me. And, of course, we got a little bit of fight info here. We have Errol Spence taking on Terence Crawford in an undisputed championship fight at 147 pounds. This will be taking place at the T-Mobile Arena in Las Vegas, Nevada, airing live on SHOWTIME pay-per-view in the welterweight division with, as mentioned, all of the belts on the line currently possessed by both men, including the vacant Ring Magazine World Championship as well. And of course, this is a preview for Spence versus Crawford. If you're looking more for a prediction or some betting odds, all that good stuff, I do have a video for that as well. I'll leave that as a pinned comment down in the comments section below, so you can definitely go and check that out as well. Now, in terms of my initial thoughts here, really the first one that came to mind when this was finally announced was the one that I think most people thought, which is, finally, we're getting this fight to happen. The very next thought, however, was, is this fight happening a bit too late? Now, this isn't to make excuses for either guy. Ultimately, both signed up. They're both ready to fight, but they have been through some things in their career at this point. In terms of Spence, you have multiple car crashes, you have long layoffs. You have him fighting pretty consistent, solid competition over and over again in back-to-back fights. Even with those long layoffs, you just wonder how much that's taken a toll on him. What's more, he's a big welterweight, and he's been having to cut to make welterweight for a very long time. On the flip side of that, you have Bud Crawford, who is in his mid-30s, who himself has been boxing for a hell of a long time. You do wonder if now at the ripe old age of 36, I believe he is going to be by fight night, if not by the end of this year, whatever it happens to be, did he take this fight a little bit too late? For both guys, for slightly different but somewhat similar reasons, you do wonder if this is maybe just a bit too late. Having said that, again, no excuses here. They both signed up. They both seem supremely confident, no matter what the psychologists and certain comment sections are trying to tell you about how one looks scared and Bud's not getting a haircut because he's so nervous and Spence looks tired because he's not getting sleep. Relax, okay? Everyone take it easy. They're both more than supremely confident heading into this fight, and it will ultimately be decided in the ring. All this other stuff about if it's too late or not really won't matter so much. It just was sort of an initial thought that I had. The second thought, of course, was sort of not just the performances themselves by the fighter, but how the fight itself will perform. As much as hardcore boxing fans deeply wanted this fight, and I think the general public did to some extent as well, again, this one's been cooking for a while. Is it happening at the sort of peak of its curiosity or interest? Probably not. You also have to factor in that, again, they are older. They're not the most talkative guys in the world. This isn't Tank versus Garcia. This is a fight between two very good fighters, but for the most part, kind of laid-back dudes. Yes, confident, sure. And if you put them in front of each other when they're kind of in each other's faces, yeah, of course, they can get a little bit riled up. But for the most part, they're kind of just chill dudes. The fight is supposed to sell itself. I just wonder how well that sell will go. I do also kind of wonder how well it does comparatively to Tank and Garcia. This is kind of a good subject for what sort of fights are ultimately going to capture people's imaginations. You have a fight like Tank versus Garcia, which in retrospect, and even going into it to some extent, you had to kind of know it was more a fight about show business. Two young dudes, one who's, definitely made a name for himself as a pay-per-view star in Tank, and in Garcia, a good-looking kid who a lot of girls are going to show up for. They're going to talk you into the building and, put them butts in seats. That's ultimately what you're doing in show business. Let's make no mistake about it. But it wasn't the most substantive fight. It wasn't the fight for all the marbles at 135, or in this case, 147 pounds. It was just a showbiz fight. And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. They're two competent boxers. They definitely can go at it. But you do wonder how that fight will compare to this fight, where it really is a matter of not so much personalities, not about personas, but about the actual fighters in the ring and how good they can possibly be, how great they might be with a win here. As a sort of observer of this sport, you always do kind of wonder which of those two really sells more, and it's a great example of really the pinnacles of both types of fights. One which is very much showbiz, and the other which is more the hurt biz. It's going to be interesting to see how those two kind of compare to one another. To some degree, you kind of get a sense of what sort of fan you are based upon which sort of fight tends to excite you a bit more. So that was kind of an interesting thought, I thought, early on when this fight was announced. Of course, the final thought is I always kind of think about what this fight does for the loser, more than even the winner, because the winner's kind of obvious. He's going to win. It's going to be pretty cool feeling, I would imagine. He's going to have some other big fights down the road. That seems pretty self-explanatory, but it really does kind of concern me as to what the guy that loses the fight has to be going through, not just emotionally or, introspectively. I don't know that. I don't know these fighters, believe it or not. They're not going to tell me all of these kind of thoughts. I just mean in terms of their legacy, their career. That, of course, kind of leads me to the thought of just who does the loss hurt most? To some degree, you can make a very reasonable argument for either man. I think it's a very interesting way of looking at it because you just don't know. You could argue Spence. It hurts more because this was always sort of the guy that people said he couldn't quite beat. He wasn't even the favorite going into the fight. And even though he rounded up all those belts, it was only to be knocked off by Crawford. At the same time, you could argue Crawford needs to win more because he hasn't quite beat that very best name at his very best, at welterweight especially. So you definitely have both sides of the argument there. Definitely something that kind of piqued my interest in terms of just kind of when I first started thinking about this fight. Now, in terms of the recent form, for the most part, I think both are pretty comparable. In their last 10 fights, you have Spence coming in at 10-0. Of course, he's undefeated with 7 stoppages. You could probably argue his best win is against Yordenis Ugas to some degree, in a sense anyway, because quite frankly, I think that was the one where he showed he put up with the most resistance against another skilled guy, a guy who was, running a little bit hot in the sport. You could argue that was his best win. The other, of course, would be against Sean Porter. The reason you might go Ugas versus Porter, however, as opposed to picking Porter for Spence as his best win, is just because the Porter fight was a bit closer, so you do kind of wonder if maybe that's a stylistic issue for Spence or what have you. That being said, I thought he clearly won that fight as well, so both were solid wins to say the least. His worst performance might be against Mikey Garcia. Garcia did not look particularly interested in that fight. He was an incredibly large underdog and really did nothing effective in the fight. Didn't really want to engage, but that being said, you would have expected Spence to be able to break down and get rid of Garcia, and he just wasn't capable of doing so. That, I think, would probably be his least impressive win to some extent. Again, this is all subjective, but that's kind of what came to mind there. Overall, I'd say, though, in his last 10 fights, he's probably a 9 out of 10. The real big issue is you could argue that Spence could have been a bit more active. Of course, not all his fault, but still, other than that, about perfect. In terms of Crawford, again, 10-0 because he is an undefeated fighter with 10 stoppages. You could argue his best win again is against Sean Porter. Again, one could maybe argue that Porter was a bit faded, wasn't necessarily into it, didn't train as well, what have you. That being said, he showed up ready to fight, and of course, Crawford did the business, being the first person to stop Porter. I give him credit for this win specifically because while Porter might argue he wasn't as prepared or what have you, he's still not a fighter who's going to go without a fight. I still think it was a decent win for Crawford. His worst win or performance, let's call it, because a win is never bad, but his performance, you could argue, was against Jose Benavidez due to his leg injury, or even maybe retroactively the Julius Ndongo fight, while he did help unify junior welterweight for Terence Crawford. After the fact, Ndongo has not looked great, and it does not make the win look as good for Crawford, unfortunately, because he just doesn't look like that good a fighter, a few fights removed. Overall, I'd still give him about a 9 out of 10, though. You could maybe argue a little lighter, like a soft 9, whatever. But ultimately, I think the biggest thing against him is that he could have had better competition at times, but he was very active, a defending champion, and stopped everyone. You can't complain too much about that. And in terms of what's at stake here, obviously, welterweight supremacy, welterweight history, everything at welterweight. The winner is going to be the first 4-belt era undisputed titleist. That's pretty interesting. We haven't had many 4-belt undisputed champions to begin with. To be a list of 10 and be the first at welterweight is certainly saying something, and it definitely adds to the legacy of both men. Which, in general, the legacy for both is on the line to some degree as well. Of course, they're both still going to be very good fighters, win, lose, or draw. This fight doesn't completely define who they are as fighters, but it damn sure does define their place in respect of their era. If you can't beat that other guy who was kind of looked at as your counterpart, it really does put you in a clear, distinct number 2 position. Of course, Spence has been there at welterweight longer. You should still give him that credit. Crawford has done more in other divisions. You should still give him that credit. But the way it works is if you lose to that guy, he's number 1, you're number 2. And that's unfortunate, but that is the way it is. And of course, the winner also has that chance to move up to 154 pounds with so much cachet, so much momentum. They're going to have the ability to call their shots, especially if that division gets broken up because of Charlo and his decisions to fight Canelo Alvarez in the future here. So you have so much riding on this, both in terms of just your immediate future, your legacy, and then ultimately what your future can look like in the division above you. To be fair, we also must mention the loser still has quite a bit, okay? Still got the payday. Still got the big shot at the biggest prize in the world. Still has a chance to move up as well, especially if Jermell Charlo breaks up that division by staying at middleweight or whatever he might happen to do. If you're Crawford, you could say it's because you were older and just not able to make the cut. Same thing with Spence. You know, you were drained a bit. You're a big welterweight. You have ways of kind of getting out of this and continuing your career. You obviously want the win. But that being said, it isn't the end of the world for either man because this fight is of such a higher magnitude. Both will in some ways be elevated as a result of it. But in any event, let me know what you guys think. You know, kind of what are your views on this fight? What are your kind of initial questions, your thoughts, all that good stuff? Leave that down in the comments section below. Please be sure to like, comment, share, subscribe, and follow me on Twitter at jcalderon_JOB. And of course, follow me on Threads at JAYONBOXING. And you can also email me at jayonboxing@gmail.com. I'd love to hear from you there. Of course, check out the prediction, which I will pin in the top comments for Errol Spence versus Terence Crawford. Would love you to check that out as well. And of course, check out jayonboxing.com for news, ranking, schedule, results, grades, all that good stuff. And as always, until next time.